Welcome to another Restored Church podcast.
As we continue to walk into our series, Kingdom Come, When Heaven Meets Earth, I want us to begin in the very core of our DNA, the very core of our souls, where the Scripture says that we were knit together in our mother's womb by the Creator of the universe and the Creator of your purposes, your passions. And within that, God put these little small things in us, these seeds that would blossom into our lives, things that we need, things that we desire, things that become essential to all peoples, regardless of race, creed, gender, whatever it is. It's all hardwired in us. At some point, we all need some level of being loved. We all need to have some level of purpose. But if you look at psychology magazines or different art groups from all walks of life, people come down to this idea that you and I, we all need to be seen. Each person in here needs to be seen. Now, the introverts right now are saying, that's not true. That is not true. And what I'm saying is we all want to be seen, not in public, not on stage, actually. The flip of our greatest need to be seen, the greatest fear often is for you to be seen in front of a lot of people. That's not what I'm talking about. But for our introverts in here, if you are married, I promise you, one of your hardwired needs is to be seen by your spouse. If you are a child, which we all are, unless somebody has some AI stuff going on I don't know about, we all at one stage of our life, or maybe throughout all adulthood, want to be seen by our parents. And as you're a parent and you raise your kids and you get them into the teenage years and then even out of the house, you want to be seen by your kids. We all want to be seen instead of just aimlessly walking through life, just passing by. And the way we go about this of wanting to be seen, I think we present ourselves in a few different ways, the ways we want to be seen. Because we live in a broken system, not everything we do to carry out the core needs of our heart are done in a healthy way. Has that ever been true for you? Right? Trying to get what you want at the core base of your soul, and it's not coming the way you want, so you just try a bunch of stuff, and half of it's not very healthy. So I actually think there's three ways that we present ourselves to be seen. The first is, I will call it the actual way, authentic way, seen as I actually am. All right, I want to be seen for the true depths of my soul, my true passions, my creativity, my hopes, and my dreams. Then that leads us into that aspirational. I want to be seen as I want to be. Right, because we have sayings like, I'm in process, not anybody's perfect. So half of the way we want to be seen is not just how we are, but who we aim to become. These purposes, these dreams, these hopes that we have. The third way is the imposter way, where we want to be seen as I project myself to be. And that's that funny combination of I want to be seen, but I don't really want to be seen, so I'm going to project something else up. And that imposter syndrome leads us into Acts chapter 5. Just last week, we finally had some tension outside of the church in Acts 4. Everything had been going so well, and now there was some tension coming. There was some things happening, and we talked about building that in, of seeing that courage of when we get punched in the mouth. How do we respond to fear? Well, in Acts 5, something different is happening. It's starting to shift. They're starting to elevate this kind of imposter syndrome within the people of God. And we pick up the story in Acts chapter 5, starting in verse 1. And it says, "But there was a certain man named Ananias, who with his wife Sapphira sold some property. He brought part of the money to the apostles, claiming it was a full amount. With his wife's consent, he kept the rest. Then Peter said, Ananias, why have you let Satan fill your heart? You lied to the Holy Spirit and you kept some of the money for yourself. The property was yours to sell or not sell as you wished. And after selling it, the money was also yours to give away. How could you do a thing like this? You weren't lying to us, but to God. As soon as Ananias heard these words, he fell to the floor and died. Everyone who heard about it was terrified. Then some young men got up, wrapped him in a sheet, and took him out and buried him. About 3 hours later, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. Peter asked her, was this the price you and your husband received for the land? Yes, she said, that was the price. And Peter said, how could the two of you even think of conspiring to test the Spirit of the Lord like this? The young men who buried your husband are just outside the door, and they will carry you out too. Instantly, she fell to the floor and died. When the young men came in and saw that she was dead, they carried her out and buried her beside her husband. Great fear gripped the entire church and everyone else who heard what had happened. I don't know about you, but I read that and I go, what? What is going on? This is so much different than anything else that we're reading. Instantly, they die. And we can look at it a couple different ways. My first what is, what in the world is God doing? Right? God is supposed to be loving. God is supposed to be gracious. God is supposed to be good. And if he's just starting to kill folks when they mess up or disconnect, why are we still standing, right? This is a tough text if you're like, I know some things are going on in me. What in the world is going on? So how can God be like this? Because this is like all our greatest fears of the Old Testament, of seeing those things like, I thought that was in the past. Or some of you, they got past the God shock and you read on, listened on, like, what were they doing? Peter said they didn't have to sell it. It wasn't like God forced them to sell it. And even when they got the money, it didn't say that they forced them to give all of it. It literally was their stuff. What in the world is going on? How in the end are they dead? Right? It's that question that we have to ask is like, God doesn't make sense. His actions don't make sense. Ananias and Sapphira's actions don't make sense. So what are we even supposed to do with this? Because it's just a weird text. It's a throwback actually to a text in Leviticus that is a pretty not well-known text of a people named Nadab and Abihu, right? Not one that we learn in Sunday school a whole lot. But it's this throwback to something that happened in Leviticus. And if we're just jumping back to Leviticus, there's a lot of rules and regulations in Leviticus. Are we now having to follow each and every aspect of not wearing mixed cotton blends, right? We can't wear cotton blends according to Leviticus. What is going on? As is true with life, in our relationships and everything that we do, we need to add context, right? Everything when we just pull an event, a situation, a thought out of the air and set it in a vacuum, there's a lot of times we can get confused, disconnected, not really sure what's going on. I want us to rewind into the back end of Acts 4. We're going to look at Acts 32 through 37. And it says, all the believers were united in heart and mind. And they felt what they had owned was not their own. So they shared everything they had. The apostles testified powerfully to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's great blessing was upon them all. There were no needy people among them, because those who owned land or houses would sell them and bring the money to the apostles to give to those in need. For instance, there was a man named Joseph, the one the apostles nicknamed Barnabas, which means son of encouragement. He was from the tribe of Levi and came from the island of Cyprus. He sold a field he owned and brought the money to the apostles. Ananias and Sapphira are a complete contrast to what we see in this perfect unity of the church in 4. See, they were not killed because they sold a property. They were not killed because they just said, you know what? This is what we're going to do. We want to help out people so they're not needy anymore. No, the cause of the death came in, there was a great conflict over glory, of who should receive the glory. See, what Ananias and Sapphira did, they wanted to be seen, but they did not want to be seen for who they were. They did not want to be seen for who they would become. They wanted to be seen as they projected themselves to be. They were imposters. See, what they wanted the feeling that maybe Barnabas had. I promise you, the people that sold the land and all that, there was something in there that people were like, oh man, look what they did. And there was a great appreciation in the community. Look at that generosity. But when it came to Ananias and Sapphira, they wanted to be kind of generous, but ultimately what was more important is they wanted to be seen as generous. And there's another shift here that's happening. There has been a lot of turmoil throughout Jesus' ministry outside of the church. That kind of is that force, that fear that presses in. But if you look at the scriptures, it isn't the force that presses in that becomes the issue. It's the insidious force within that destroys from the root out. We see it in the story of Judas. He is the one who denied. Actually, one of Jesus' own disciples was the one who kicked it off for his crucifixion. And now we see it in Acts where Ananias and Sapphira, in the core of who they are, now being a part of the group, is now saying, no, I want to be seen as something that I'm not. I want to be seen as one that has glory. I want to be seen as the one who is generous. The very core of glory means weightiness. Right? Glory is weightiness. And when I think of that word, I think of we just got through graduation season. And we're into wedding season. Right? And we've all seen these where you think of the helium balloon bouquet, right? There's a bunch of balloons, and what keeps it centered or what keeps it on the table? There's that weight. Everything is connected to that weight. What happens if you remove that weight? They all go everywhere. See, as a church, God's is that weight. God is that glory, and glory is God's alone. So what we're starting to see here in the contrast is one is an imposter that wanted to be seen as this so they would receive all these accolades, all these great things. Look how awesome Ananias and Sapphira are. Well, another community was focused on let's stay connected to who God is. See, when we look at the apostles in 4, they were united in heart and mind as a whole group. When we look at Ananias and Sapphira, they conspired together apart from the church. When we see the apostles and Barnabas, they shared everything. Ananias and Sapphira shared in part. See, the apostles and Barnabas, it said it was filled with this powerful teaching. Ananias and Sapphira were kind of co-opting the teaching of God for their own glory. See, the apostles would give to those in need. Ananias and Sapphira wanted to be seen as generous to those in need. And it seems like the apostles and Barnabas, as that fear came around, it says in the text that they were scared to join. It's actually in the backside of this. Later on in Acts, it says they were scared to join, but because there was so much power in the church, they overcame that fear and people still joined. Well, Ananias and Sapphira, again, go out in body bags. See, glory is God's alone, being that center is God's alone. And I want to kind of give us a picture of why this is so terrible what Ananias and Sapphira are doing. I got an image for you here. Throughout Acts in different parts, we see on the left side, that's Acts 4 in particular, where it seems like all represented by the red outlines of the people, that's force coming in on the church. But the people are connected together. Well, in Acts 5, 1 and 11, the force isn't coming from the outside, but it is coming from within. John Stott, famous pastor and theologian, incredible man who just recently died not too long ago. This is his quote: "If the devil's first tactic was to destroy the church by force from without, his second was to destroy it by falsehood from within." See, this is actually the harsher one. What we're seeing throughout Acts, when we see the power of God, we also see the pushback of spiritual warfare. And the one that we see from the force from without, that spiritual warfare outside of the church, I would say is like bacteria. Spiritual warfare from within the church is like cancer. See, bacteria can be damaging, right? It can be. It can cause us to be sick. It can cause sepsis. There's some terrible things that can happen by bacteria. But you know what? If you're able to push through and not be overcome by bacteria, what happens? It actually makes you stronger, healthier. You can take on more things. And this is true. Spiritual warfare from outside of the church, when we walk through it in unity and joy together, when we push through fear, when we see it to the other side of courage, even in your own life, but especially as a group of people, we are actually stronger in the backside of that. It's why God allows a lot of that. God could go like this, but He knows that as spiritual warfare comes as a force outside of us, outside of the church, as we walk through it, we actually get stronger and stronger and stronger for the journey. See, when you walk through things, what was tough 10 years ago is a blip on the radar now, because God has moved in your life. God has worked in your life. God has shown Himself to be powerful and worthy of all that glory. But spiritual warfare inside the church is like cancer. Even if you overcome cancer, your percentages of coming back skyrocket. In no way does cancer leave you unaffected. In no way does it actually leave you healthier on the back end. It is a destructive force focused on mutating every cell within you and permeating itself into everything else. Right? Why is it so important to catch cancer early? So it doesn't spread. Right? Why was it so important for Ananias and Sapphira in this seemingly tough text? I will tell you, I'm not going to be at the end and saying this is not a tough text. They came out in body bags. It's a tough text. I won't apologize for it, and I can't explain it away. But I can tell you how it came to be. But what they know is that it's so important that we've got to remove that cancer before anything spreads. I will say in the church, this is what's so important, is if you are unified, you can overcome everything. If you are disunified, if there's disunity amongst the cord, you can't do anything. Right? What is a small molehill will overcome you if you do not have unity. But it could be Mount Rainier, and you can overcome it if you have unity. And what we get focused so much here is Ananias and Sapphira's imposters, that they wanted to be seen as generous. But ultimately what they were doing was stealing God's glory. That's the cancer here. And self-righteous glory in the church kills the church. Self-righteous glory in you kills you. Go back to my balloon analogy, right? One of the biggest issues about us seeking self-righteous glory is not just about us, but what it does to other people. See, you start to get to, oh, look what Ananias and Sapphira gave. Oh, I'd love to be like them. And you see and you start to put your focus on the wrong person as you see them. You're like, oh, look what they did. I want to be like them. Our call is never to compare ourselves to be like someone else. God created you with unique purpose and passions on purpose. We are to compare ourselves only to God. And going back to that image is Ananias and Sapphira at the best are a helium balloon, right? What happens when we start to look at that and say, oh, I want to be like them? And you start to connect yourself to that helium balloon, disconnecting yourself from the weight of God's glory, and then connecting yourself to the lie that is the self-righteous glory of Ananias and Sapphira. What happens to those balloons? They go straight up into the sky. They no longer are centered. And then they burst, they drop in the ocean, and they kill aquatic life, right? That's what happens. That's what happens. But there is fallout from this self-righteous glory because that starts to be modeled, and that's where you get a hypocritical, insidious, focused church. Is when the glory is removed from where it is rooted in who God is. Where the church is no longer rooted in God's glory, but it is flailing around connected to human glory that is no glory at all. See, self-righteous glory kills in the church. That's why God hates it so much. God is not so worried about his glory because he's thin-skinned. God is not so much worried about his glory because he's like, well, go back to Genesis, where the serpent, basically his focus was, God just doesn't want you to be like him. Like, God is worried you're going to take his spot. God is not worried that you will take his spot because it is impossible for you to take God's spot. You did not create the cosmos. Sorry, guys. No residuals on that. You did not knit yourself together in your mother's womb. No. What God is worried about is this will be another way we destroy ourselves. And this is that his plans and purposes for you are so important that he does not want you to buy into lies. And when we present ourselves in this effort to be seen, we all want to be seen. I promise you it's in there, regardless of what you say. If you say you don't want to be seen, it's because some way sin has affected that and made it not safe for you to be seen. But we project ourselves as something that we're not, so that then people will see us as we're not. You see how ridiculous that sounds? I'm going to try really hard to mimic something that I think other people want, and then I'm just going to chase that. You may not be pulled out of a body bag out of here this morning, but your soul's going to die. If you keep putting on masks that aren't for you to wear, you are going to die. Your soul will die. Your relationships will die. The purposes and plans that you have that God put in there will die because you're not being you. You're not being the one that God created. And you're presenting to a world that doesn't really think about you all that much and trying to live by their standards and their approval. See, Ananias and Sapphira, as terrible as that story is, it's in there for a reason and to be a warning to us. God, the goal of being a follower of Jesus is not to be seen as generous. It is to be seen by God, and then his transforming work of his Spirit will help us look like him. Generosity is not our goal. It's the overflow of knowing God. Generosity is a natural overflow of a transformed life. What I love about Joseph, who many called Barnabas, is this dude sold his property, gave it to the needy, and people had to be like, man, you are so generous. But to prove my point, Barnabas wasn't just focused on being seen as generous. So they had this young Mustang, so to speak, and tried to break the horse in so he didn't hurt himself and hurt other people, named Paul. Right? He had just come to faith. He had went out, about got himself killed, and came back and was like, all right, we need to work out the rough edges. And Barnabas was like, all right, I'll go with him. And in the book of Acts, there is a cool thing that happens. In the first handful of chapters, it always says Barnabas and Paul, in that order. That Barnabas is there to kind of show Paul the ropes. And when Paul's ready, the scriptures flip to say Paul and Barnabas. He stepped back so Paul could go forward. He stepped back into the shadows to go forward. And it comes to a point where the two of them go their separate ways because Barnabas wants to give another man named John Mark a second chance. And out of that second chance, John Mark would hear Peter's story and give us the Gospel of Mark. See, in Barnabas, we see what it means when God is the glory, when God is the weight, when God is the one that gets that, because out of that transformed lives because the power of God is there. And I want you to know we can try to present ourselves as something that we're not. God knows us. God knows the deepest parts of you. See, God sees us as we are and who we will become. He sees us in our reality, and He sees us through the lens of the hopes and the dreams that He has uniquely knit together in our DNA. In following God and being a part of who God is, when He is that weight that holds the church together, the weight that the church relies on and rooted in, there is no room for imposters. God doesn't need you to be perfect, but God needs you to be you, because only when we are us can we deal with our stuff and move forward. As we go into Ananias and Sapphira, these are harsh words. I've never preached on it, and it's a hard one to come at. But in the end, it's a needed thing for each one of us. As we rely on the power of God, there is a flip side. He is powerful. He is not governed. He is not under our control. He is a God that is bigger than us, better than us, that loves us so much that we get to be a part of it all. So as we go into our couple songs of worship to close up, what I want us to wrestle with as we proclaim these songs is, how are we presenting ourselves to God and to others in order to be seen? Are we sharing who we really are and who we want to be? Authentic and aspirational are great qualities when they are married together. Or are we imposters, seeking to present ourselves as we are not? And as we do this, know that the authentic, aspirational you is safe in the hands of the God who created you. Amen?
Thank you for listening to the Restored Church podcast. We are a church for the rest of us. We hope that God will use this to connect you with Jesus, kick you out of your comfort zone, and propel you to impact your community. If Restore has been helpful in your journey with Jesus, we ask you to consider investing in Restore by giving online at restoremtown.com. With your support, we will continue to restore Marshalltown and Central Iowa.